Okay, hello everyone. We'll start this session. I am Victoria and I'm joined here with my colleague Kalaika from IDinsight. This session today is around digital tools for farmers. We will first introduce our organization, IDinsight, because we have quite a number of sessions at G-Local this week. And then we will discuss a bit more the objective of the session, which will be centered around two studies we've been conducting. So one with IDRC and one with Care Mali. I'm also trying to add people as we go. So just to give you a bit brief context about IDinsight and who we are. So we are a nonprofit advisory that helps partners use data and evidence to improve life. So more specifically, our mission is to help governments, NGOs, funders to maximize their impact by turning data into actionable insights. And we do so by tailoring our methods, so including impact evaluations, monitoring systems, to the needs of each partners. So we can conduct large-scale data collections, to leverage AI with our data science teams, or partnering long terms with governments, supported by our teams of economists as well. And very briefly, so you can see here, we are around 200 and more people spread across Africa and Asia. So Galeka and we're based in the Dakar office, which is one of our office on the continent, along with Rabat, Nairobi, and Lusaka. And you can see here on the screen some of the clients we've been working with in the past. So that includes governments, major foundations like Gates, Hewlett, GiveWell, and NGOs in the field of education, agriculture, and health as well. So this is quite a brief introduction, and I'm happy to share a bit more context about our work and what we do at the end of the meeting. So just getting to the core, like what we want to present today around digital tools. So the goal today will be to share some evidence and practical experience on how digital tools can actually empower farmers, and we will focus more specifically around women farmers. And we will do so by looking at two projects that we've been conducting recently in the region. So one is a scoping study with IDRC, and the other one, which Kalaika will share later on, is a project where we collaborated with CARE in Mali. So to give you a bit more context about the IDRC scoping study, so IDRC is the Canada's development arm that funds and supports locally led research. And they do have a focus on agriculture and food systems. And we've been, as part of the ag portfolio, we've been tasked to, we've been partnering with them to better understand how digital solutions can support smaller farmers in North and in Sub-Saharan Africa. So we conducted the study from January to June last year. And what we did was to identify areas that has been under-researched around digital agriculture and smaller farmers. So especially around how included are smaller farmers using digital tools, and so what are the potential effects of digital to promote climate resilience and gender equality. And very briefly on the methodology, so we've done so by doing a number of key informal interviews. So that included different actors in this ecosystem. So we had some implementers that built these tools. We had some funders, researchers as well. On the first stage, it was continent-wide, and then we focused on 3 countries that are quite different in terms of digital and then ag and regulatory dynamics, which were Kenya, Morocco, and Senegal. So in this session, we will present specifically our findings related to gender and inclusivity, but the report has been published, and I'm happy to share the link at the end of the session as well. And I let Galeka present the Care Mali study as well.
Thanks, Victor, for the introduction. So hi, everyone. My name is Galika, like Victor said, so I will not reintroduce myself. So I will be the one speaking to you today about the results of our evaluation on the Care Mali project. So this project was a case study of the SIMAGRI platform, and I'll dive a little bit more into that a little bit later. But this platform was established in the context of a collaboration between Care International in Mali, as well as AMASA and AMPROD. So AMASA is the Malian Association for Food Security and Sovereignty, basically, and their mission is to enhance food security and sovereignty in the region, especially around actors in the cereal sector. And the AMPROD is also an NGO, so it's a Malian Association for the Protection and Development of the Environment in the Sahel region. And their focus primarily is on improving the well-being of local communities. And they were also a partner of the USAID-funded Feed the Future Mali project. And that project's aim was to bolster agricultural resilience and market-driven economic growth in northern Mali. So to do that, that's how the SIMAGRI platform was born, basically. So it's a digital tool for farmers so they can access information around market prices, so they can conduct transactions remotely. So it's also served as a sort of online marketplace for farmers, and they can also receive agricultural and environmental advice on this platform. So the partnership. So Care International collaborated with us, IDinsight, to evaluate this digital tool for women and youth in agriculture. And the SIMAGRI, as I said earlier, the digital platform was the focus of the study. And the objective was to understand the potential of digital solutions to support inclusive and resilient market access, basically. And the two focus areas were primarily to identify the key barriers and enablers to using digital tools for agriculture, but also do a deep dive into gender-specific experiences with these tools with a particular focus on women. So in that sense, our two main research questions were articulated around the effectiveness of digital solutions in promoting inclusive and resilient market access, as well as their role in alleviating mobility constraints, especially for women. So always that gender lens. I'll pass it back to Victoire to talk more about the IDRC scoping study. Thank you.
Thank you, Galaika. So yeah, let's deep dive into these two studies. And actually, before we go into the findings, it would be good to also define, what we mean by digital services. What we mean is technology and platforms that can actually support smaller farmers' agricultural decision making around accessing finance, accessing loans, accessing assets that could be necessary for agriculture, access to information such as weather advice, price information, and also access to markets to get buyers as well. So eventually the goal of this tool is really to empower farmers, and by that to improve their productivity and eventually to enhance their livelihoods. And in our study, like through the different interviews we've done with key informants, we first realized that small farmers can face a range of barriers that can actually limit their access to these tools. And these are in three main categories. The first one is technological. So often in areas where smaller farmers live, there's poor connectivity, and they can also have a low digital literacy. So even if tools are available, they often struggle to actually use it due to lack of familiarity, lack of trust, with socioeconomic factors as well, such as the cost of data, the language in which these tools are built, and then different education levels that can constrain both adoption and then usability. And then sort of interlinked, but cultural dynamics can also play a role. That's around social norms that can influence who access and benefit these services, especially women, and we will detail that in that presentation. So beyond this barrier, what we saw is that to make these tools more inclusive, providers interviewed in our study are taking strategic steps to sort of address these barriers. And the first one is around user-centric design. We see that many providers have emphasized that simple and interface are quite important, as well as sort of an iterative process grounded in farmers' needs. So that means not developing the product in Nairobi and then scaling it in the field, but really being able to put farmers first, do not build the tool in silo, and be able to engage with them directly to help refine the tool over time. And that's sort of linked as well to having a clear value proposition. So these tools must really solve real problems and demonstrate tangible benefits. We've seen a lot of tools that are very specific and sometimes are not grounded into the realities of farmers. And what has been quite engaging with smaller farmers is bundled services. So being able to engage within one specific platform, different services such as access to markets, information, or price as well within the same tool. It needs to cater to diverse user groups. So that means having a platform that is accessible across multiple interfaces, such as basic phones, so SMS, USSD, and IVR, which is voice, works well, as well as offline features. And some tools also support local languages or integrate mobile money as well, which can be sometimes seen more safe by farmers than using cash. And finally, what we've seen something as key is the offline support coupled by agents. So I mean having field agents, community leaders, or cooperatives as stakeholders to be able to drive awareness in these tools and onboard farmers in using these tools. So having sort of this third point of contact that can help them access and then benefit the tool. So this is more like the general picture. But what we see is that access alone doesn't tell the full story. And that there's actually for quite some gaps for women farmers as well. So while women farmers make half of the smaller farmers in Sub-Saharan Africa, they account to around less than 25% of the digital for agriculture users. And this gap highlighted a challenge in terms of both access, but also meaningfully using and then benefiting from the tools. And just to explain these sort of different gaps, we see that there's like different sort of set of constraints that are related to the general constraint of smaller farmers, but also specific to our gender. Women are less like up to 40% less likely to own a phone compared to men counterparts. So they often rely on a single phone from the household, and this combined with like lower digital literacy can make it more difficult to access digital tools. There's also financial barriers that play a role because women can tend to have a less disposable income and fewer economic opportunities. But then access is one side, and we see that there's also usage and benefits that are challenging. So as we said, social norms can limit women's decision-making power in agriculture. And that's particularly true when land ownership is concerned, because in a lot of different contexts, it's hard for women to access land. And many of these digital services are actually designed for landowners. So that sort of further sidelines them from benefiting from it. Also, in terms of product design, we've seen in our interviews that many tools actually don't reflect the realities of women farmers. So that doesn't account for the crop they manage, their mobility constraint, or their preference for financial services. We've seen in the study that women often prefer saving mechanism over loans, and many of these digital tools actually emphasize credit. And then finally, training and support. As we said earlier, like offline support and having field staff that can onboard smaller farmers is quite important, but often this training doesn't accommodate for women's schedules or their learning needs, so that can sort of be from a missed opportunity to increasing the usage cap. So from this sort of set of constraints, we can see that without having really gender intentional approach, there can be a real risk that these tools actually reinforce rather than reduce these inequalities. So we've seen actually a few steps that has been done by digital tools provider we've been interviewing in terms of making it then work for women farmers. So from our interview, sort of 3 areas emerged. So the first one is around product design. And we've seen some interviewees involving women directly in the design process, often highlighting like value chains where women are active. And then the second is around data and insight. And this is more in terms of the back end. But we see that a few digital tools providers are beginning to build sort of gender disaggregated dashboards. So that means, having a dashboard where you can see the adoption, the number of users, the number of active users by gender. So that can really help you identify where and pinpoint you why women may be dropping off in this user journey, and sort of like how can these bottlenecks be addressed. And then the last one, which we've been talking about, is around field operation. So some strategies are emerging with like recruiting female field agents, which sort of tend to be like more effective in reaching women farmers, or sort of adapting the training programs as well. And I will finish off with maybe 2 examples of digital providers we've been interviewing, and sort of like their work around including women. So the first one is Oko Finance, which is active in Mali. So they provide crop insurance for smaller farmers. And basically they realized that their original products was actually not aligned around the crops women were growing. So they had a product for maize, for millet, for sorghum, but women were often growing like onions and tomatoes, but are different crops. So they sort of redesigned their product to cover crops grown by women farmers. And what they saw that, and they also like created like sort of gender sensitive trainings with women farmers. And what they saw that within 2 years, women went from making up less than 10% of their users to 33%. And that sort of show that, if you really tailor like your products and your delivery channel, it can really make a difference. On the other end, we have the example of Agromol in Nigeria. So Agromol is also an agri-tech company that provides finance to smaller farmers. And they had launched a loan product specifically for women, and even removing the land ownership as a requirement to make sure that women could benefit from it. But despite these efforts, they actually like the number of women stayed very low. And they started investigating, and they realized that actually it sort of came from the social norms, with some men like worried about their wife financial independence in accessing this loan, and sort of stopping the women to using it. And this is sort of also a powerful reminder that even if you have like well-designed tools, they won't have an impact unless you actually address that social context as well. I will stop it here for the IDRC study and give the floor to Galaika, who will present CARE, and be happy to share more insights during the Q&A afterwards.
Victoire. Okay, so now we'll speak about the SIMAGRI platform. So as I said earlier, so this is the main case. This was the main case study under the CARE Mali evaluation project. And this platform has, so somebody is unmuted. Could that person mute themselves? A little distracting. So there are 3 key features offered on this platform. So the first one is the price information. So this gives farmers real-time updates on agricultural product prices, basically, which helps them down the line make informed decisions about when and where to sell. So given the price that I'm seeing on the platform right now, do I bother going to the market? Is this good enough for me? There's a second feature, which is the offers feature. So this allows farmers to publish their offers for crops and inputs. So somebody can publish an offer and say, I want to buy XYZ at ABC price, or I want to sell XYZ at ABC price. So this platform acts like an online marketplace to facilitate transactions directly between the farmers. And lastly, the third feature, which was in its pilot phase at the time of evaluation, was the advice feature. So our findings don't focus too much on this particular feature because it was still in pilot phase. But this advice feature provides guidance to farmers on agricultural techniques, and it also gives them information on the nutritional value of the different foods. And as you can see, there's like a screenshot of what it looks like, of what the platform looks like. Please do pay attention to the fact that there's a lot of text on this particular screenshot. So the platform is very text reliant, and that's important for the recommendations later, which we're going to talk about. So I will not necessarily re-explain the context because I think Victoire set the foundation for this quite well, talking about digital tools for agriculture in Africa, which are diverse, expanding, and they show promise to foster economic, social, and environmental benefits for farmers. But as you saw, there are still challenges that remain to scale the services, and more specifically, the impact of these tools on livelihoods still need to be clarified. So given this context, our study aimed to gather users' perspectives and their voices to identify barriers and enablers for women and youth farmers in adopting and making the most of these digital solutions, especially in vulnerable contexts such as the Delta Zone in Mali, which is a conflict region. So the research questions were, as you can see, so how are digital solutions perceived to be effective in promoting inclusivity and resilience in access to markets, as well as how do digital tools help alleviate mobility constraints for women and young agripreneurs, basically. So before we dive into the findings, I do want to give a little bit of context around the sampling frame and the limitations of our study. So initially, the goal was to reach 500 people with an equal split of 250 men and 250 women. But due to constraints in the field, our final sample size of farmer users was 376, still with 190 men and 186 women, which is sort of an equal split to really do that comparison that we want to do across genders, but still lower than the intended 500 respondents that we wanted to reach. So as you can see, there were what we call inactive enrollees. So we called a lot of people, and more than 1,000 of the people that we managed to speak to on the phone were not using the platform. And nearly half of them just said that they didn't know where their number was registered. And pointing this out now because it matters for the recommendations later as well. So 40% didn't know where their number was registered on the platform. And for the remainder of these people, a lot of them just said that they just didn't know how to use the platform, basically. So given these limitations, what we did when interpreting results is that we've rather focused on the practical and economic significance of our findings. So we prioritized results that had meaningful implications rather than relying only and entirely on statistical significance. So we triangulated evidence from multiple variables to highlight consistent patterns and robust trends to ensure that our conclusions, interpretations, as well as recommendations were well supported by the data, but also informative for future program decisions, basically. So now into the interesting bit, the findings. So as you can see, we had a lot of inactive enrollees, so people on the platform not using the platform. And we wanted to understand whether there was any particular characteristic of these people that could explain why they're not using the platform, and we found no significant socio-demographic differences. And we looked at location, we looked at gender, we looked at the type of income-generating activity between SIMAGRI users and those inactive enrollees, and none of these could explain platform usage, basically. What we did notice, however, is that our smallholder farmers, those who actually use the platform, they tend to have higher education levels, and they're less likely to be among the lowest earning people. But we couldn't make that comparison across education and income with the inactive enrollees because the survey with the inactive enrollees was very short, and we didn't focus on these bits and pieces, basically. So we couldn't make that comparison. And that's also important later for the recommendations. So the second part of our findings was the platform use. So here we start to understand two main things before we delve into the two main research questions. So here we wanted to understand how do people access and use the platform, and if there were particular obstacles to women using SIMAGRI that men did not face, basically. So one of our main findings here is that women primarily access the app, primarily access SIMAGRI, sorry, because there are different ways to access it. So there's the application, there is the web page, there is a vocal function, so people can call, and there is a text-based option as well. So we find that women primarily access SIMAGRI both through the mobile app and the vocal function, as well as men. They both use the app. But as you can see, women rely more on the vocal function than men do. And we think that this is linked to another variable, which was the digital skills. So we evaluated respondents' digital skills across 4 main variables around how easy is it for you to send a text, how easy is it for you to access the web, so those sort of skills. And we created this sort of aggregate digital skills. And although women do find these tasks easy, most women do find these tasks easy, so they rated fairly well across these digital skills, we still found that their scores were lower than those of men. So basically they had a relatively lower level of digital skills, and that's why they relied on the vocal mode more than men. So that's one of the key findings. And we also find that women and men use the platform with similar frequency. So men don't use it more frequently than women and vice versa. But women do face more obstacles, one of which is the digital skills, like I mentioned, but also greater financial barriers, lower literacy levels, and also they reported a higher need for assistance when using the SIMAGRI compared to men. All of these will tie back to the recommendations later, but keep in mind these are the main findings across platform use here. Now, moving on to the research questions around access to market and inclusion. So we start to understand 3 things here. So does SIMAGRI help farmers have better access to markets? Does it help farmers broaden their business opportunities? Does it have more trading partners, have more trading opportunities? And does SIMAGRI help farmers bargain, basically? So here, maybe to preface the findings here, so a key outcome of the theory of change was that SIMAGRI would help alleviate mobility and insecurity constraints for women. Remember, this is a conflict zone in Mali. So the assumption was that due to insecurity, mobility was limited, but that's not what our data indicated. Basically, contrary to expectations, insecurity was not cited as the main reasons why farmers did not go to new markets. As most farmers we found, and especially women, they visit markets regularly. By regularly, I mean at least twice a week. So as you can see on the graph, the main reason for not accessing markets is actually the fact that people say that they don't need to commercialize, they don't need to sell their products in new markets. But we do see also that security still remains the second most barrier here. And other barriers were also the lack of suitable trading partners and unattractive prices as well. Now, in terms of broadening farmers' business opportunities, so with SIMAGRI, farmers did report that they have more trading opportunities. They report that they're able to conduct transactions at the posted price, and they also report using the price information feature to actually bargain and get to a price that is advantageous to them, basically. So moving on to the resilience bit. So as I said earlier, so people are making, people have more trading opportunities, they're able to conduct more sales, etc. So it follows logically that people feel better prepared to face shocks. So some people have managed to increase their income. Some people have managed to venture into new income generating activities. Some people have even managed to save a little. So I remember there's one woman who even reported that she was able to hire someone to sell for her at the markets on the days that she's too busy, for instance. So SIMAGRI, in a sense, has contributed to building resilience, especially for women farmers. And the women reported feeling more independent and not having to rely on family members or other people for money when facing shocks, since they'll be using the platform. And moreover, for women specifically, we also find that they report feeling more autonomous in household decision making, since they're now contributing to the household finances. In our call interviews, there's like one specific woman who said that but now with SIMAGRI, I'm making more sales than usual, and I'm able to help my husband with the financial decisions for the household. So these were grosso modo, these were our main findings. And given that this is a study focused on women's outcomes and their experience with the platform, and we were trying to understand whether they were faring better than, faring the same as men or worse, we typically find here that they're not necessarily lagging behind. But we'll dive into that a bit more as well in the recommendations right now. So based on these findings, we had 5 main recommendations. And additionally, we also had recommendations for further research, which I'll present later. But more on the programmatic recommendations now. We find that some farmers, and especially women, it tends to come from women, they find SIMAGRI complex to use. And we think that's due to lower literacy and digital skills. So here we recommended that to improve accessibility and inclusivity, people, the SIMAGRI platform should keep and enhance its vocal mode. So it should keep offering the same range of services that it's doing now, so the same 3 features, and it should be very intuitive. We also recommended expanding voice support to more languages beyond Bambara, which is the language of the vocal mode right now. So broadening the languages will help more people actually use the platform. And also remember the screenshot I shared earlier about the platform and how it's very text-based. Another recommendation as well to improve accessibility for low literacy users was to simplify navigation with more visual cues. So more icons, more images, things that are a little bit more intuitive, easier to understand, and less text reliant. So people who don't necessarily are not comfortable with the language, don't know how to read, etc., they can still use the platform. So that's one of our main recommendations. Now, second recommendation was around training and support. So 1/3 of our respondents expressed a need for more training to use the platform effectively. Remember that a majority of people who know about the platform but are not using it said that they're not using it because they don't know how to use it. And even some people in our sample who are using it did mention that it's a little hard to use. So here our recommendation was to extend training sessions, especially for women, and to schedule them at times that are convenient for women. So keeping in mind that maybe at night it's not convenient to them because they're responsible for they have household responsibilities, childcare responsibilities. So trying to find a time of day that is suitable for them. Another approach here also could be to deploy in-field agents to provide hands-on support So these will be people who are in the communities, ready to help people, especially at the beginning. So in the initial adoption phase of the platform. So when people are just starting out with SIMAGRI, they don't necessarily know how to use it, how to work around the different features, etc. And additional to that, maybe to even reinforce, that support, we recommended having what we called a network of user champions. So these would be farmers who received advanced training on the platform and could assist other farmers locally, basically, and help them out more punctually and wherever that's needed. Third recommendation here was to reduce the cost of access for SMS and vocal modes. So we think that disadvantaged farmers, women, and people in remote areas probably often rely on SMS, the text-based option, as well as the vocal option, due to a lack of smartphones. So they can't necessarily access the app or the platform or their webpage, sorry. So due to lack of smartphones, financial constraints, or poor network connectivity, for instance. So we think the high cost of SMS and vocal access could be a major barrier, which limits both current and potential users from using the platform fully. So it's important to actually reduce those costs to ensure that vulnerable groups can access and benefit from the platform. One thing to note is that the platform itself is actually free, but because it's a web page or an app, you do need a mobile plan or access to internet. And because it also has the SMS-based and voice-based options, you would need some sort of mobile plan to be able to call those numbers or write those numbers, text those numbers, basically. Another fourth recommendation is that there's a need for further research on inactive enrollees, because as we said, this was a big piece of the limitations around this study. So this study focused on active users and explored the gender differences, but we don't know much about barriers to adoption among inactive enrollees and non-registered farmers as well. So here we recommended further research with non-users, with inactive enrollees, to provide richer comparison groups and basically help benchmark the outcomes that we found. More precisely, this would actually allow for a more holistic comparison between women users and non-users in the same area. Because remember, all we can say here is that women experienced XYZ outcomes. We can't necessarily say women who use SIMAGRI are better off than women who do not. We don't have that comparison group, and we think it would be important to have it to be able to make that comparison and really gauge the impact of this tool, basically. And lastly, the fifth recommendation would be to improve database quality. So this also ties back to having so many numbers on the platform for people who actually are not using it. And we think it's important to do periodic reviews of the database to reveal issues such as incorrect gender entries, inaccurate contact information, and whatnot. So whenever SIMAGRI wants to do a follow-up, wants to understand user experiences, they actually have the right number to call, and that's basically improving efficiency. And lastly, we had 5 main points for further research, and I'll try to stop in 3 minutes because maybe there are questions. But the first one is basically what, like I said earlier, so trying to understand the experiences of the outcomes, the economic outcomes of women users versus women non-users, to really be able to say or not say that women who use SIMAGRI are better off than women who do not. We also think it would be important to look more closely at the differences in use and value of the platform, given the type of agricultural activities that people are engaged in. So really trying to understand which feature tends to be preferred by what group, and that would help, tailor the platform a little bit more to the needs of the users. Complementarity and interaction between features. It would be great also to understand to a certain extent whether people who use 2 features in combination rather than one, are their economic outcomes better than people who use these are the 2 features in combination. So really doing a more in-depth comparison here, as well as gender differences in feature relevance and assistant needs, again, related to feature and trying to understand whether women use XYZ feature because it's better adapted to their needs, or vice versa for men as well. And the last area, which we thought was very interesting, was to look at household dynamics and gender roles. So as we saw earlier, women did report that they feel a bit more autonomous in household decision making, but we think it's important also to have a closer look at the gender dynamic after using SIMAGRI. So basically what's happening, what we're wondering is, okay, women are more autonomous. Does that also mean that men are taking on a greater household responsibility, or does that responsibility still fall on women on top of their, economic responsibilities outside the household? So really trying to understand the dynamics and the gender roles once women are a little bit more empowered or a little bit more autonomous, basically. And that's it really for Kermali and the platform. And we'll take any questions, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. I don't know if you wanted to add anything else, Victoire.
No, thanks, Galarika. And as Galarika said, like you can, we're free for questions for the rest of the hour. So you can type those in the chat, or you can unmute yourself as well.
Can I have a small comment? Can I?
Sure.
Yeah. During the presentation, I had this thought that it may be both genders who are not enrolled or less in usage, less in the usage of digital platforms. Would there be options for simulated purchases and simulated selling procedures in the platform? Because when we meet farmers, even if we explain things in words, it will not be very easy for them to understand until they do it practically. So if there are simulated purchase and selling options in the platform, they might go through that selling and purchasing cycle a couple of times, which will be useful for them to implement when they are doing it alone. Don't you think that will be a meaningful, one of the learning tools we can give to the farmers?
If I understand correctly, you think that having gone many times through it, they'll eventually get the hang of it? Or maybe.
Yeah, eventually they will learn it iteratively when they start using the simulated purchase and sell option. When they do it real time, they won't be having that hesitation, fear whether I'm going to do mistake or in using the platform.
Well, this evaluation did come a year after, a little bit more than a year after this platform was established, and what we found was that some people were still, struggling with the different features, and I think a bit of it really has to do with the text-based reliance, basically, because most people are using the app. So I think that's probably where they're struggling the most, because the complaints around, complexity of use, that didn't necessarily come from people using the vocal mode or the SMS mode. It came from people using the app mostly. So maybe iteratively, and that's also, a suggestion for improving user experience and adding those cues, like I said earlier. Maybe iteratively actually didn't help to keep, using the platform as much. Thank you. So I see another question. So yes, the berries. So the berries we mentioned are berries we actually identified through the evaluation. Like I said, I don't know if there's a gender analysis that took place prior. Yes, I see your hand is raised.
Hi, first of all, great presentation. Thank you so much. This is so insightful. Great work. So the first question I have is, how much of what you uncovered during the evaluation could have been uncovered if proper monitoring were done? So, for example, some of the findings seem quite seem to be something that a good monitoring system can uncover. You don't necessarily need to do an evaluation to uncover. So, for example, the one about the user-centered design of the platform, for example, whether people are really using the platform, whether the platform itself is text heavy or not, whether it's user friendly. I mean, this is data that you can obtain on a day-to-day monitoring if you have a really good monitoring system and capacity in terms of staff and technical knowledge and things like that. So yeah, I guess that would be yeah, that would be my main question.
We can't necessarily speak to Kiamali or Feed the Future, the implementer's capacity in a sense, but I can say that this was the first evaluation after this was implemented. Into my knowledge, there isn't necessarily a monitoring system in place, because as you saw, a lot of these numbers were those numbers were inactive in release, or people just didn't know how to use the platform. So maybe that follow-up wasn't necessarily done, wasn't necessarily in place. So so yeah, basically I think a monitoring system would make sense, but it would need accurate data. So the database would need to be very up to date. So there would need to be like this constant people in the field, or at least calling people to have their feedback on the user experience. Because one of the recommendations from some of the respondents actually was to have more conversations with people who designed the platform, have more conversations with people who established the platform, so they could actually talk about what their needs are and how to implement them better. But at my understanding is at the time that wasn't happening. Really. Yeah. That helped.
Yeah, and like when you're designing the platform itself, like wouldn't you go to the people, to the community, and try to understand like their literacy level, gender differentiated, variables, and then design it and then pilot it, test it with them, and then roll it out? Like that's quite standard. But like you won't wait for an evaluation to find out if people are actually using the system, the platform or not. Like you can uncover this through day-to-day monitoring and a proper product design from the outset.
I think because the focus, well, personally, I didn't think it would uncover some of these things, because personally the focus of the study was really trying to understand how women were faring. And I think some of these things, while they didn't necessarily come off as a surprise to us, it made sense that it was revealed through that evaluation, because it was the first one happening. So yeah.
Well, if no one has any other questions, we might close the session. But I'll share again the link of the IDRC study and final report, which has been published. Galaika, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you've published, because that was for the client, so there wasn't any public report on the Care Mali project. And we can also share our contacts, so that if you have any other questions, if you want to contact IDinsight, you have our contacts here. I think this was the only ag webinar we have this week, but we have colleagues presenting quite interesting work around education the rest of the week. So I think you can look on the website and see the specific hours and time, and hopefully you can attend some of these sessions too. So thanks everyone, and have a good rest of the day.